Welcome to this event of the 20th International Literature Festival Berlin.
I'm Alvin Pang, a writer and poet from Singapore, and I'm here with my lovely friend, the novelist Yvonne Owuor from Kenya.
Hi, Alfie. Good to see you. How has
Good to see you again. Well, you know, things have happened. We haven't seen each other for what, months? Almost over a year. Oh my goodness.
You know,
we last met in Germany, in fact. So it's a nice sort of reunion, right? To do this for Berlin.
It's a reunion.
We last met in Berlin. Yes, a year ago.
Exactly. It's absolutely appropriate. How have you survived the COVID season?
Well, it's not too bad. It's been, okay, I hate to say that it's been good. It's not been good. But I managed to finish my PhD. Things are actually settling quite well in Singapore. The death count in Singapore is thankfully really, really low. There are a lot of reported cases, but things are quite stable. I think in general, things in Asia have been reasonably even-handed, and we're hoping that things will remain that way.
Okay.
What about you?
It's not too bad here either. We've kind of managed to contain the worst of the pandemic crisis. We're kind of muddling along and hoping desperately that things can go back to normal. But I have enjoyed it. I wouldn't lie. Let me not lie about this. It's been perfect for introverts. It's been an exceptional time of catching up on K-drama, for example. I hope that has a purpose for something in the future. But startled by the way the pandemic has, if you want, changed the shape of the world.
Well, we've all been thinking a lot about this. In some ways, it's changed the world. In some ways, I feel like it's actually accelerated trends that have been going on for some time. You know, I was just thinking about how a lot of things that we've been wanting to do or hoping to do, or trends that we've been predicting, have just been speeded up because of this, right? One classic example is the number of things that we're doing online now, and things like working from home and, you know, education and training online. We've been talking about these things for years. You know, progress have been lackluster, and then overnight, because of this pandemic, everyone's been forced to up their game and just really step up and get things done. So in some ways, it's an acceleration really of things that have been going on, and you see that in the way countries are reacting as well. I think that there is a real split. We're seeing a real split between how, for example, Asia Pacific and Africa are reacting, and what's been happening in the US and Europe. US classic example. You know, it's just multiplied what's going on.
Shocking.
Right.
It's shocking.
So my sister lives there, and when this first started, you know, she came to visit in February, and when she first went back, we're saying, look, you know, this is just starting out. Be careful, right? Take precautions, buy masks, and they were like, nah, this is an Asian thing. It would never affect the developed world, you know, in such a big way. And we're like, you know, don't be so sure. And true enough, what we're seeing is the complete opposite of that. You have the developed world just reeling from the shock, from the complacency, I suspect, of having to deal with something like this that they thought could never happen. Whereas those of us who, you know, have always been in survival mode, who've always been, in a sense, paranoid, been conditioned by maybe things like SARS and other disasters in the past, found ourselves a little more prepared, which is a good thing. I'm not complaining.
You're being polite. We've been a lot more prepared. I was extremely shocked by the initial reactions actually really shocked, because I think a lot of the mythologies and the assumptions that I had believed, and especially because a lot of these countries had touted their superior health systems, but confronted with a real existential crisis that required the structures and the systems, the much touted structures and systems, to showcase their excellence. It's a bit nerve-wracking how the systems collapsed almost universally.
Yeah, I think there are a lot of assumptions that were made that didn't turn out to be correct. But what has been really surprising is that wealth has not been a good predictor necessarily of success in dealing with this. So, for example, one of the best, Germany has, relative to the rest of Europe, been doing well. It's held up as one of the best examples. But you look at a country like, say, Vietnam in Southeast Asia, with 92 million people, a larger population than Germany, I believe, and they've had a recent resurgence. But even so, you're talking about tiny numbers of cases and of fatalities, right? And this is a communist system. This is a country that's supposed to be poor, but they've shown, I think, a preparedness and a social resilience that is really to be admired by all of us.
But it's
apples and oranges.
Yes, Vietnam. There's Cuba. There's
Rwanda.
The Caribbean islands like Barbados. There's Mauritius. There's Namibia.
Taiwan. New Zealand.
Exceptional, really, truly exceptional. I don't know. I think I'm still shocked by what happened in Italy. It still bothers me up to now, when the only people who showed up were not the fellow Europeans, but were the Cubans, even the Somalis showed up, the Chinese showed up. I think. Yeah. I'm curious, because we are kind of metaphorically in Berlin. I'm curious about what implication that has for the future of the EU. The idea of those who were expected to show up in a time of crisis not showing up until it was much later. I think this pandemic has been a kind of crucible of something that maybe it'll take years to figure out, but I don't think the world will be the same again. And I don't think the comfortable assumptions of 2019 can sustain themselves.
Well, I think in some ways, the world shouldn't go back to the way it was. The way it was is clearly found wanting, right? You're talking about a crisis that has exposed a lot of institutional complacency, like it or not. Even in Singapore, we've dealt well with the situation, but still it's revealed, for example, a divide between how we look after our citizens, which is very, very well. And we have our own blind spots, which is the migrant worker population. Hundreds of thousands of migrant workers in Singapore were sort of left out of the measures to prevent COVID, and that's where the infections are. We've sort of stepped up. We've realized this blind spot, and we've stepped up to it in a way that people have been talking about for years. Give them better housing, so on and so forth. But it took a crisis to wake us up. So I really think we shouldn't go back to business as usual. I think the new normal in some ways is a wake-up call, right? It wakes us up to things that we should have noticed a long time ago. Weak spots within our system, within our assumptions that we really need to address. And that's a good thing. The question is whether we realize these mistakes and fix them. We realize these blind spots and plug them, which is how one should always deal with error. Or do we deny them? Do we think it's all a hoax? Do we think we are somehow immune to these very human fallibilities? I think that's the danger that faces the world today.
No, I like what you're saying, but my little nephew was telling me in January when this thing was, he was very concerned. I'm amazed by how the language, the grammar of children around this particular thing. He was very obsessed with those who were not wearing masks. But he told me that God had taken us, all of us, humanity, on a timeout. I really like that idea.
Nice. Nice. I love that.
A kind of enforced season of being still, of looking within, and Kenya itself is not exempt from the process of a kind of internal examination. A lot of its craziness, its madness, has kind of shown itself in a very public way. More and more, the politicians are being called scavengers now. Masks are off. Again, I know as a country, we are not going to be the same. Certainly, there is a younger generation, not just in Kenya, but I think everywhere else in the world, that has lost its
innocence.
I mean, yes, it's lost its innocence, and it's lost its something about their sense of respect or awe for an older generation has been much diminished.
And it's good timing, right? You are talking about turning of the generation with the turning of the century. You are talking about, again, it goes back to, accelerating trends that were begun at the turn of the century. We're still working in so many ways on 20th century or even 19th century assumptions about what work is, how we organize public life, and so on and so forth. And, with the internet coming, there was an early nudge, and now we see it was only a nudge compared to the extent of revolution, right? And fundamental change that needs to take place. So I think this is, I love the idea of a timeout because it suggests both an opportunity to reflect, but also punishment, right? That somehow we've done something wrong. We have erred. So the question for us, I suppose, is where have we gone wrong? What have we gotten wrong? And what then have we done that? Have we used our timeout wisely? What should we be thinking about, during our timeout? Should we think about what mischief to get back into, or should we really, be good boys and girls and other creatures?
I think we've spent a lot of the time whining and wanting things to go back to the way it was. But what's been very interesting during the lockdown, I don't know what happened in Singapore, but certainly in Kenya and in Nairobi, we had no idea. A lot of us who have grown up here and love the city had no idea that without the movement of cars and people, the mountains would show up. The skies became clear. The air, it was amazing.
Wildlife coming back to the streets, grass, lush greenery. We were getting that as well. Absolutely. Yeah, it's wonderful.
One of the rivers near where I live had turned into a swamp, and within no time you started to see kind of like bird life and other life showing up in the river, the clearing of the waters. Maybe the timeout was needed for nature, not for us. Maybe nature had begged whoever's in charge to kind of please take these people away for a while. I need to breathe.
Well, you could also call it a fever, right? It called a fever. It just felt sick from all the stuff that we've been doing to it. Mother Nature, as it were, and she just needed to lie down for a little while and be quiet. And we have, I think, in some ways, been obliged to be quiet along with her. And of course, being children, we're sort of fidgety and whiny and want our toys and ice cream. Some of us, I think, have come to appreciate.
Have we reached yet?
Are we there yet?
What else do you think? What other lessons have certainly? What lessons have you gathered from this particular time?
Well, certainly I've gotten the sense that we are absolutely not organized for contemplation and quiet. Our lives, our spaces, our roads, our architecture. Just not organized, right? Look at this.
Right.
Look at you. look at me, you know. And then
Yes.
it begs the question of how then should we structure our lives? And that's on the physical basic level, you know.
Yes.
How will work change? How will life change? How will our homes change? How should they change? That's on the physical level. And then the other thing is the why, right? The whys. Why should we do certain things? Starting to question, for example, what is essential or non-essential work has been something that a lot of societies have had to grapple with. And you realize things that we take for granted turn out to be extremely important, and things that we consider quite important, like telemarketing, turn out to be not very much at all. On the one hand, you could say the arts not essential at a time like this. We need our doctors and nurses and all that. But on the other hand, where would you get the K-drama to watch, you know, in quarantine, if not for artists and writers? And we need our creative people to fill our time productively and keep us sane. we're doctors and nurses of the spirit, right?
We are, aren't we? I like that. I would borrow that. I would absolutely borrow that line. Yeah.
So and then of course it's Singapore in particular. I think it's vulnerable to this because we are so small and we don't get to grow our own food or things like that. We have to buy things from everywhere else, and it really got us thinking about very basic things like where our food comes from. We had to buy eggs at one point from Poland.
Wow.
From Poland, right? We have all of Asia, and we could only get our supply for a short period of time from Poland. It just really makes us question how we are connected, how we relate with the world and with each other, right? And then of course, that's trade, but also in terms of interpersonal relations, in terms of ideas, in terms of culture, entertainment. Where do we get our entertainment from? Whose ideas do we listen to? Who has the right advice for dealing with a pandemic like that? And of course, everything is up in the air. None of the conventional wisdom can be taken for granted anymore.
Started going into the national park and going for hikes. And just finding suddenly you'd wake up in the morning and suddenly the entire city is jogging.
Everyone's suddenly obsessed with exercise. Why?
It was such an interesting, it was a fascinating kind of shift, I think, in priority and need. And it would never have occurred to us before, certainly. The other fascinating thing is that there are a lot of people who have just abandoned the city. Yes, jobs were lost and all of that, but there are enough who have just decided they're done with the city, and have gone back to countryside homes.
So what do they do when they hit home? When they go back?
Mostly, I guess, agriculture.
Right. Start growing their own food. There's a whole movement here, even in very urban Singapore, and in fact, the national parks, they're distributing seeds so that people can grow their own little vegetables in their window gardens. Isn't that great?
But I think what's interesting is that I think what we referred to earlier, perhaps this was about nature, the reassertion of nature, the idea that we needed to, both metaphorically, figuratively, and in reality, to touch the soil again, to understand that we are a part of nature, not apart from it. But what implication then does that have for the future, for the next step, for the coming generation, for us, the writers?
I think it's very interesting because I was looking at this as part of my PhD work, and then it happened that the whole world, in a sense, was engaged in a little bit of practice research along with me. You notice how we've become so steeped again. We're paying so much more attention again to the body, and it relates to touching the soil. It relates to being more active, being out in nature, exercising more. It relates to an awareness of wearing a mask and of breath and of presence, you know, and what is missing, right? So it's the idea of the body which has, you know, since the Enlightenment been in a sense pushed aside for the sake of the mind, has come back into the human equation, and it is the body that connects us to nature, that reminds us we are not apart from nature. We are part of what we call nature. That sort of man-nature divide is rubbish. It always was. And this crisis, in a sense, is an epistemological, ontological reminder, basic reminder that we can pretend all we like, but we are soil.
Beautiful, beautiful, Alfie. That's so beautifully put. The idea, I love that idea of the return of the body, the reassertion of the body, and the necessity to protect the body in order to live. The greater awareness of what it means when you lose the body, when you die. I think that has become extremely more apparent and more of that reality. That it is actually surprisingly easy to die.
And also that so many things connect us to life. So many things we take for granted, right? Everything from food to each other to the systems that we rely on to work. And nothing works by accident. Everything needs to have been done, to have been accomplished, to have been arranged. And we realize now how intimately we are reliant and dependent on each other and on the very air we breathe, and on touch. You know, touch has become something we can no longer take for granted.
It's so precious,
right?
Yes.
And one of the interesting things that has come out of this is how, along with COVID measures and protections, you know, people washing their hands more and wearing masks, all the other usual infectious diseases have dropped. Flus, measles, and then it made my sister think, yeah, we've noticed it in our household. You know, we don't get the sniffles. I wonder if people were much more unhygienic and careless before. I'm like, you think? You know, there's been just so much blithe assumption, right? That we walk through the world like kings, like lions, thinking we own the place. We don't. We're floating on, you know, on some sort of cloud that we've made for ourselves. But it's not forever. It's something that has to be paid attention to, protected, and shared. And shared. That's really, really, really important. Being rich, being powerful in and of itself is no protection against, you know, you can't bribe a virus, you can't jail a virus, you know, you can't tweet a virus away.
You can't launch a war against a virus.
Well, you can try. It's not going to do you any good. So it's a time of great humility, and I think it's great.
Given the idea, the need for intimacies, the notion of social distancing, the notion of you know, the inability to touch. What do you think that means? How do you deal with that? The social distancing.
I prefer the term safe distancing because and it's a term that we sometimes use here as well. Safe distancing is something you do when you drive. You keep a safe distance. There's this sense that everyone's moving, and you're in negotiation, but you know you're just keeping a prudent distance. Social distancing sounds so cold and sounds so harsh, right? And really, you want people to get the idea in their head that it's not absolute distance. It's just whatever distance you need to be safe. It's just prudent, right? It's polite. Social distancing is like, you know, stay away from me. And I think the term itself carries this resonance that has contributed psychologically, I believe, subconsciously to a sense of despair. To a sense of despair. I think more people would be happy to keep a safe distance than to keep their social distance. That's what I think. No, but
no, I think you're completely right. I think you're right about that.
And I was just thinking, you know, even in any relationship of any sort, friendships, lovers, family, we do keep our distances. I mean, intimacy is always balanced with privacy, right, of a certain sort. And that's not the same at all as social distance. I think that's also safe distance. So in life, we do maintain our safe distances, our boundaries with each other, and I think it's correct.
Yes.
Whereas social distancing is about pushing away, and I don't necessarily think that's healthy. In some ways, this COVID thing has made me reconnect with a lot more people that have dropped out of sight because we've been checking on each other. If not for this, I'm not sure we would have been doing this. You know, we would probably have waited for the next occasion. We would have done something else. We would have, you know, waited for our next festival to run into each other. But my point is this pandemic has made people want to find ways to connect, and I think that's a very healthy aspect of the new normal we should keep. And I think we're working harder. To connect in different ways.
I think so. Yeah. You know, well, it certainly introduced me to Zoom. I've got a mixed relationship with Zoom.
Yeah. Love it, right? Yeah. Oh, the other thing I wanted to ask if you've noticed this. I've certainly noticed this. One of the wonderful things about having to work through Zoom and so on as a writer is the opportunity to reach a much bigger and much more diverse audience and viewership than ever before. So in a physical sort of reading or symposium, or you know, a classic example was my PhD exam, right? I mean, it was supposed to be just a few people in a room.
Right.
Because it had to be online. I mean, it's technically public, but who would fly all the way to Vietnam just to watch this guy do his PhD, right? It would have been a really small, closed community. Because it was like this, digital and online, I had so many people from all over, including from Singapore and overseas, sort of tune in to watch, right? And so we got to, you know, a lot more people from different places got to hear it. And I've been on so many panels where in the past it might have been like only Hong Kong writers or only Singapore writers, but because it was online, we could hear from people all over the world. And I think that expansion of who we think we should be talking to and listening to is really, really healthy. I know we've been dreaming about doing this, and in a sense, it's now okay, right?
It's absolutely happened.
Right. It's like it or not, it's actually happened, and people accept that this is now the norm. So I'm looking forward to doing more of this, right? I'm looking forward to more festivals and events.
Does Confluence figure in this? How does Confluence does? I know you talk a lot about Confluence.
I mean, you could say the metaphor applies in so many ways. We could say that the pandemic is a classic example of so many different flows of human activity coming together. And again, confluence isn't necessarily a good thing. It describes the way in which different forces in life come together to create effects that you probably couldn't imagine at the start. So you have trade flows and migrant flows and tourism flows, movements of people and viruses coming together to create this perfect storm. But it's also about technology and relationships and culture and the arts and literature having their own flows. You know, things haven't stopped just because the virus has stopped certain kinds of flows. We are flowing around the problem. We are creating these opportunities to come together, and I think we should recognize and celebrate that. That's confluence also. Yeah.
That's very positive, I must say. I must say that. I'm curious, what are you reading now?
Who, me?
Yes.
Oddly enough, I'm reading Jose Saramango's Blindness.
Really?
Have you heard of the novel?
No.
And it's fascinating because, and I'll describe the story, right? So I'm doing some research on writers who have been writing about blindness,
right,
and or going blind. And I came across a recommendation of this novel. I think it was Borges who recommended it. Anyway, doesn't matter. And I picked it up and started to read it. And it turns out that it's also about an epidemic.
No.
Yes.
Oh
yes. So it's about a sudden epidemic that strikes a city. This guy is at a traffic light and suddenly he goes blind. And it's infectious, right? One by one, the people he comes in touch with go blind, and there's no explanation. There's no precedent. Nothing appears wrong with him, and it's about an entire city suddenly going blind and coming to a halt. It's perfect. It's perfect.
Oh my goodness!
It's perfect. Yeah. So confluence again. I wasn't expecting that. I was expecting a story about blindness. There you go.
My goodness, amazing. Strangely enough, I found myself reading John Anderson's Che Guevara. I've become I've become obsessive. Not obsessive, yes, obsessive. I think I've got a crush. I read it up to the point where I knew he was going to die. Then I couldn't read anymore. But it's been, but in terms of looking for another ideology of being in the world, a kind of how do you say it, human transformation.
Yeah,
it's been a particularly sobering and insightful, in terms of everything. The bravery and the courage to believe so strongly in, I think, which is a thing I think we have lost quite a bit in this world. So that's what I've been doing, reading the revolutionaries.
Well, it is a time of revolutions, isn't it? I mean, you have most prominently the Black Lives Matter movement, which has had global implications. And that could not have happened if not for COVID. It couldn't have gone viral in that way, if not for the fact that the world is in this grip. Yeah.
I think you're completely right. The fascinating thing of the involvement, say, of the what do you call it? The K-pop fans in influencing even policy and activities all the way in the US. It's incredible.
And again, right? One of the assumptions we have to throw away is the idea that influence only moves in one direction, from the West out to the rest of the world. That clearly isn't necessarily true anymore. Probably never was true, right?
I think it was. I think it was not true. I just think it was not noticed. But it's become noticed now, and it's become too overt, very, very overt. And I think the season of the virus has actually aided that.
Yeah, and it cuts both ways, because I think it's led to, for some, an awareness and an awakening and a deepening of their connection to their bodies and to the world. For others, it's led to an allergic reaction. They don't want to deal. They want their old world back, in which they were on top of the heap.
Yes.
And I think the world is at this inflection point of tremendous opportunity, but also tremendous danger. Because you have people who don't want a brave new world to take place. They want the old one where they were comfortable and on top and in charge of things, right? So thrive.
If you were imagining the immediate future, what would that look like?
I think there's a lot of pain before any. You're really talking about birth pangs here. You're talking about tremendous suffering still to come from the economy, from COVID, inevitable. We hope minimized, and there are ways in which we can. It's reached a point where the things that you can tell when people try and do the right things, when governments try and do the right things, the harm, the suffering is really minimized. It can be done. We've shown it, right? You can really keep it to a level where it's manageable. Inconvenient, but manageable. People don't have to die. Hospitals don't have to be crowded. It can be done. You also see people reluctant to do the right thing as well. So I think in the short to medium term, that will play out and that will have a cost. Some places, some societies, some communities will continue, I think, to do mostly well because there is a sense of wanting to do the right thing and wanting to look after each other. Other societies, other communities, I think will continue to be in difficulty for a long period of time. And so I don't think there is a single answer nor a single easy way out. You will see a fracturing of response and a fracturing of futures. But then again, that happened last century, and that happened in the century before that, and that happened in the 16th century when Europe entered the Indian Ocean, right? In a sense, the history of mankind is the history of unequal fates. And adaptation and coping. The bigger pandemic, the bigger crisis to come, many say, is climate change. This is not even a dress rehearsal for the extent of that. So there is a sense in which we better wake up and think for ourselves what kind of world we want and work with others of like mind, wherever they may be, to try and build it. I think that's all we can do. I don't want to be either optimistic or pessimistic, but I do think there is a lot of work to be done and a lot of work ahead of us. And I think if there's any time where we can say no one has the right answers, now is the time. We can no longer look to any one God, as it were. In the human realm.
Will the old self-appointed gods leave their thrones, do you think? That's one question. The second one, I think you mentioned something about suffering. And our old world, the pre-2019 world, pretended quite a lot that suffering was the preserve of a certain group of people. And the crisis, I imagine that part of the crisis in the world is the crisis of our inability to, how do you say it? It's not the word embrace as much as to understand that part of the riddle of what does it mean to be human is to experience at one point of your life some form of suffering. No human is exempt from that. No society is exempt from that. Will we, certainly with this virus, will we come to that will we become comfortable with that reality? All of us.
I think you've raised a really good point, which is that we who are privileged and relatively well off in life, wherever we stand, we've forgotten that suffering is a fact of life for so many people in the world. There are communities and groups and individuals in the world for whom something like this, where a disease can wipe out their entire family, they have no recourse to healthcare and so on, is a fact of life, COVID or no COVID. Right? That is their reality. It is only because this virus has been extensive enough to affect those of us who are in the shelter of privilege that the world has taken up, set up and taken notice. The fact is, suffering has always been with us. It has been convenient for us to downplay or ignore it, and to assume that it is sort of a casting, like the lot in life of a particular group of people. Even in our midst, and I'm talking about even wealthy societies, even in our midst, we have people who suffer, who have less rights, who have difficulties and challenges that we don't see. So I really hope this is an opportunity for us all to learn compassion, for us all to just realize the very basic, simple fact that human beings are fundamentally dependent on each other and related to each other. That we are connected, and not only are we connected, we rely on each other to survive. So let's treat each other a little bit better. That is my wish. I see some of that taking place. For example, in Singapore, with the COVID outbreak, philanthropy, donations, charity has tripled.
Yeah. Oh, wow. Yes.
Right.
Yes.
And that's very encouraging. I mean, on the one hand, you could say, oh, it's a response to a crisis thing. On the other hand, this is when people could also become more prudent and look after themselves. But instead, what we are seeing is an outpouring of wanting to help. I think that is encouraging. I wonder if we see that happening. I'm sure that happens around the world. People selflessly coming forward to help in big and small ways. I think that's a reminder of what humanity needs from itself. Right? It's a reminder of our better angels.
What are you writing?
No, you shouldn't ask that. I'm still recovering from my PhD.
Oh, that's an excuse. That's not an excuse.
I know. Range of things. I'm working on a range of things. They're secret. Yeah. But what I can say is that I was I've been working on a novel set in a post-apocalyptic future.
Yes.
Set in a sort of revised future Southeast Asia, and I always wondered what was the big sort of catastrophe that led to this reworking of the world. And then
you are.
I don't have to make it up. It's perfect. It is exactly the kind of shakeup that would have led to the world I'm imagining.
Brilliant.
Perfect.
How lucky you are. Oh my goodness. Yeah. That's
so I just have to read the news and pretend I made it up. Yeah. Unfortunately, people might think it's non-fiction by the time I'm done.
Since it's not, your muse did it. I now know who's the cause of this COVID virus. Your muse.
Yeah, I did beg for an extension, and then boom. What about you? What are you working on?
Yeah. Well, I hope our paths cross in better days ahead.
I know.
Whatever that means. Yes.
It will happen. It will happen. We need to plot off screen to do something together.
Yes.
No more excuses. Confluence. Yes.
Confluence.
Technology.
Oceans.
Yeah. We'll make it happen. We will order the new world in our own image.
In our own image. Exactly. Yeah. Well, yeah.
All right. We should leave the poor Berliners off the hook. We should.
Okay. Thank you, Berlin. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Thanks for listening.
Everybody and the technical team.